My name is Tao, and I'm a screenwriter and director. And here are 5 books that you need to read if you want to be a screenwriter, if you're starting out. The first book is Aristotle's The Poetics, fundamental in the construction of the tradition of storytelling in the West. And a lot of the things that you may hear about today come from this book. The concept of catharsis, where negative energy is purged out of the body as a result of watching or reading something sad, and the power of that in terms of moving an audience and moving a reader. The concept of the tragic flaw, when you're writing when you're writing Scarface, what is it that leads to his ultimate demise as a personal internal flaw that ultimately leads to his fall from grace. Pride, hubris, all these, specifically hubris is another word that you can extrapolate from that book. The Poetics, highly recommended. Read it. The other thing about the Poetics, it discusses the notion of a screenwriter, a writer, a storyteller imitating life as opposed to reflecting life as it is. So imitating. This is not a photograph. This is a painting. So emotion and all these other elements that can cloud the objectivity of an image should be incorporated in the story. So whether that be thoughts, that be emotion, all that spectacle, all that should be added to a story in order to make it powerful, make it spread. The second book is my favorite book of all time. It's Virgil's Aeneid. Now, there are 2 things about this book that I think screenwriters can learn. The first thing is complexity in plotting. This story starts in the tradition of in medias res. Homer used it in the Odyssey, but here it is used throughout the whole story where you're going back in time. It's very Christopher Nolan-esque in the way that it kind of breaks up scenes and flashbacks. We start with Aeneas, who is a Trojan who basically has been sacked by the Athenians and is on the run to go find another place to establish a city. And it's in his destiny to go to the shores of Italy and create Rome. But in his mind, I just want to go somewhere, just land and build. And this story, unfortunately, doesn't go as well as he hoped. He is constantly being chased after by Juno, who is the goddess and who is in favor of the Athenians, who wants the utter destruction of this Trojan hero. And through the flashbacks, we get a sense of where it started and how we got there. And the other aspect of this book that I think screenwriters can actually learn, apart from intricate plotting and not losing the thread of this man who's supposed to go and found Rome despite all these diversions, is the concept of vivid imagery. And this is why I think this book has been prominent in classics for the last 2,000 years. It was written around the time of Augustus, the son of Caesar. And vivid imagery plays the most important component in that being the case. Specifically, Book 2, The Fall of Troy. In no other piece of literature prior to this time had anybody described how Troy fell. We've heard of the Trojan horse, we heard the sacking of Troy, but that was the first time it was ever done. Homer didn't do it in the Iliad, didn't do it in the Odyssey. Virgil was the first person to do it. And when you read the words, the translated words of Virgil, as Aeneas is grabbing the household gods, is grabbing his father, his son, and his wife, and they're trying to escape Troy in order to get on the ships and head to greener pastures. You can feel, it's palpable, the tension. Number 3, the Tao Ching by Lao Tzu, Chinese philosopher, who wrote about one's connection to nature, the human beings connecting to nature, and how effortless action can lead to accomplishing a lot of the things that we wish to accomplish. And for a screenwriter whose work needs to feel natural, because if it isn't natural, it's gonna bump. We're always striving for naturalism. This feels like naturally should come out in this character. This scene feels natural, it doesn't feel forced. And Wu Wei is a concept in the Tao Ching. And it's not a religious concept, it's a philosophical state of being, of effortless action and allowing things to actually flow naturally like a river. And you go with the flow so that your writing can flow naturally from the story. And then it's also the essence of minimalism, doing the least amount in order to gain the most. And by focusing on effortless action, that's when new ideas start emerging, something that feels organic to the scene. So as a screenwriter, it is essential that you incorporate this sense of Wu Wei. And the other thing about Tao Te Ching that you can take as a screenwriter is the concept of yin and yang. Yin and yang, opposites, negatives and positives. You might read this in other screenwriting books, but the notion of, you can't just maintain the same tone as you're writing a story. It can't always be happy. It can't always be tragic. You need to alternate between the yin and yang of a story in order to make it dynamic and vibrant. The fourth book that you need to read is Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And most of you have probably heard of it before. If you haven't, it is a seminal book in kind of modern storytelling, which explores two main things. One is the concept of the monomyth, that cultures across time and across space share stories that have similarities. And these similarities connect to our universal or a collective subconscious, is something that Carl Jung had talked about. And that's where a lot of this where a lot of this book comes from. It's Joseph Campbell's study of Carl Jung's work. And the collective unconscious is what connects us as a whole, connects humanity as a whole. And understanding the monomyth allows us to write stories that can resonate universally. If it can resonate universally, it can resonate locally as well. And extrapolating from that, the notion of the archetype, and that is, what are characteristics of individuals or heroes or villains that we can pepper throughout stories in order to make them connect with the reader more effectively. And archetypes are recognized throughout time and throughout space as these characteristics that we as individuals understand to represent a certain thing. And the more we understand these archetypes, the more we can use them, the more we can subvert them, the more we can clash them together to make a more dynamic individual or more dynamic character in our story that feels foreign but also feels recognizable. And finally, the last book that I would recommend you to read is your journal. As a screenwriter, you need to write not only other people's stories, but also your own personal story. You need to be able to write down your thoughts, your feelings, your concerns about a certain story plot while you're writing something. You're expressing your emotions in a way that feels safe and useful. And by keeping your journal down the line in 4, 5, 6 years, you can always go back to that entry on June 5th, 2018, and that was the kernel of the idea of the script you're still writing now. And it helps you remember why you started writing that story, why you started writing that scene, or why you wrote this character, who inspired you, what inspired you, when and where. And by having the journal, not only are you purging through catharsis a lot of that negative energy or a lot of that frustration you have as a writer, but you're also keeping a thread in the way that Virgil did with Aeneas. You're keeping a thread consistently of your own story.